Excellent. Welcome everyone to this evaluators gathering, and hopefully there are a few others besides just evaluators on the call, because I think this is going to be relevant to lots of different folks. The theme for today is thinking about how we develop, share, iterate on, and gather feedback amongst evaluators on our instruments, our different protocols, and tools that we're using to do our evaluation work in projects. And this, been noodling on this idea for a little bit, because one of the things from one of our very first evaluators calls that came up as a need was a way to see what other people are working on and what they're developing as part of their projects. You know, there's not a whole lot out there that is rigorous, reliable, or valid in terms of RPP assessment tools. There is the framework that we refer to often, developed by Aaron Henrik and other Aaron's colleagues. But there are other frameworks that we know people are using as well, other bodies of literature that people are drawing on, and we're just not sure what all everyone is doing. So the idea was then, how can we have a platform where people can actually look at the other things that we're all creating, comment on them, try out different constructs or specific items and things like that. So when Monica's able to join us, she's been giving some thought to how she might be able to use the csedresearch.org website platform as a way to sort of structure something like that. And then on the flip side, I just got done saying that there's not a whole lot out there that is like valid and been tested and all of that, but there is a group of researchers that's working on developing that, and that's where Caitlin Farrell and Paula Arstragati come in, and we will have them sort of kick off this call talking about their work. And spoiler alert, they will be asking for anyone who would like to participate and help them create some of these valid and reliable measures toward the end of their spiel. So without any further ado, I think you all have your own slides. Are you able to share your screen?
Yes, let me go ahead and do that right now.
Excellent.
Actually, no, I can't. It says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Well, let me see if I can change that.
But these should be the slides that you have. So if you need to pull them up on your screen.
Maybe. If I can, though, I would rather just see if I can make you a co-host. Okay.
Oh, I am a co-host. Okay,
great.
let's see.
Now you should be able to share away.
There you go.
Excellent.
All right. Is that visible to everyone?
I can see it.
You can see it? Thumbs up? Great. So I'm Caitlin Farrell. I am the director of the National Center for Research in Policy and Practice, which is at the University of Colorado Boulder. And I'm joined here with Paula Arstragati. Do you want to introduce yourself, Paula?
Sure, thanks, Caitlin. I'm the director of the National Network of Education Research Practice Partnerships, or NERP, and we're based at Rice University in Houston, Texas.
And also, we're here representing a larger team. Also involved in this work is Kristen Davidson, who just joined the call. So Kristen, I'm glad you could be here with us. Yes, so Stacy, thank you for kind of launching us off. I think speaking to RPP evaluators or folks who are thinking about doing research either for evaluation purposes or basic research, or to be supporting practical improvement for RPP work, there is this question around how to go about measuring RPP effectiveness. And Erin and her co-author team are really the first step in terms of developing the framework around the different dimensions and getting input from the field around that. We're able to sort of stand on the shoulders of giants and then ask this question around how can we be thinking about refining those outcomes and defining those dimensions in order to then support the development of measures to help us be able to do some of that improvement work, or potentially evaluation work. And then as Stacey pointed to, which are these measures that have, can we develop measures that have validity evidence to them, so that they are getting at whatever they are, whether they're survey items or interview items or an observation protocol, that they are getting at an underlying construct and an underlying thing that we think is really important to RPP effectiveness. So I'm speaking about this from as the researcher person on the team. I do want to just pause though for Paula to chime in here though around the practical need for this work, because it's our project has been funded by William T. Grant to do this measurement study, to develop these and to be testing these measures out for folks in the field. But Paula and I and our team have gone into this to do that work, but with an eye to meeting needs of RPPs in the field. So I just wanted to give Paula a chance to share that perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. I kind of want to give some history here too. We invited Aaron back in 2016 to do like a dry run of the original Henrik et al. Framework at our annual gathering back then. And it's so amazing to me how far we've come since then, how many conversations we've had since then. So it came from like, all this, the idea, then to the paper, to now we're getting to the point of having actual measures. So what we've seen in our conversations with NERT members over the years is how important it is to be able to say something about how effective the work is, because as many of you know, it's so time intensive, it's resource intensive, it's challenging. And so without being able to really, and I hate to say quantify, but just really be more precise, I guess I would say, about whether or not we're advancing towards the actual goals that we set out to do. It's been an ongoing conversation we've had for so long. So we've just been so excited to be able to take this next step with all the folks involved here. And you all play a really important role too, because you're thinking about this already. And so that's what we're like most interested to hear about today, is like, you've tried some of this, like you're tinkering with it right now. And so, we'd just love to hear any of your experiences and thoughts and how it's worked for you and how you've approached it. So thanks so much.
Paula, thank you. I put her a little bit on the spot there. So let me give you just a sense of what we're up to. And then I want to dig in, as Paula was saying, and get your thoughts and feedback about one particular dimension that we've done some refinement work on. We began back in winter 2019 to sort of interrogate that Henrik framework. We did that through an interview study with folks in the field. We looked at existing RPP literature. We looked at other measures that were out there in different sectors, survey measures, interview items. And then we hosted an expert convening where folks came together and helped us interrogate the dimensions and think through where could we go and gather evidence to support a claim about whether an RPP was making progress on that dimension. Where we are right now is developing a survey and interview set to get at some of those, to try and gather evidence for some of those claims. And we're getting ready over the summer to do the larger field test of the survey and interview items with the goal in the winter to get into analysis and interrogating our items themselves, which ones worked, which ones didn't. Our goal is to be able to have these items be applicable or available to RPPs of all different polka dots and stripes. So we'll see if that's something that we can actually do as a design challenge on our end. So this is the broad timeline for the project that we're in. And I did want to just say a minute about like where we're thinking about validity evidence for this work. How are we going to be able to really align the data or the evidence that we're gathering with the thing that we want to talk about? And so we start not with the survey item. We start with what's the outcome, what's the dimension, that was really all of last fall's work was what's the dimension? Where are the boundaries around these different dimensions? What would it look like in practice? Let's revise them. Let's clarify them as we need to. And then what would be those things that people say or do? What would be those situations? Maybe it's a meeting you need to go to. Maybe it's an artifact you need to collect. Maybe it could be a survey item somewhere that someone could self-report on. And then from there, getting into item writing. So what would allow you to know where an RPP would fall in terms of that outcome? So this evidence-centered design starts with the construct and then gets to item development at the end, whereas some other ways about going at this maybe jump to developing the items right away without really as much interrogation of the outcomes and refinement of that outcome space. But that's really where we ground all of our work in, are the dimensions and claims themselves. So we want to bring you into the conversation. So the Henrik framework, familiar to everybody, I'm sure, is for dimension 2 is around conducting research, or I believe originally it said conducting research to inform action. So already you see one revision that we've made, conducting research or inquiry. We have in the gray our claims we're hoping to make as related back up to this dimension. And then in the white, the 2A1, 2A2 subclaims that help even put a little additional sort of meat on the bones when it comes to what we would look for or hope to see as related to this construct. One thing to highlight that we're calling forward in our revision work is the green. Anything that we have in green here on the slide is where we see equity in particular coming forward, and here thinking about equitable participation within the partnership. It's not only that the RPPs are developing a research agenda or inquiry questions focused on local issues of concern. Part of that is considering where and how all relevant, if all relevant stakeholders are present or if their perspectives are represented. Similarly for 2B, around RPPs engaging in research inquiry activities, are there processes and structures in place that take into account differences in power or culture? So we're really trying to make more explicit some of the equity elements to RPP work here. And then the goal, once we have these ideas ironed out, these claims and subclaims remain connected to the dimension, would be that to then have the survey items or the interview items or the observation protocol that would help be able to gather evidence for each of these different claims. So this is new, and you all have been using the dimensions framework to do measurement development. So I wanted to get your feedback on, in terms of dimension 2, what evidence have you gathered in the past for this? What successes and challenges have you had? And then I would love in particular to hear any feedback you have related to how we're trying to bring forward equity. This group is such an amazing brain source of folks who are doing exactly this kind of work and running into the bumps in the road that we have. So we would love any of your advice and guidance on how you've made this work or the challenges that have come up. So I'll leave these questions up. I can also go back to the revised framework piece, but we have a couple minutes to talk through this. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Stacy, is it helpful to leave the questions up or the dimension up?
Is it possible to copy the text of the questions and put those in the chat box and then leave the framework up on the screen?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes, it's going to require, I think, a little, hold on, let me get over in here. Oh,
Make it creative.
Maybe not.
So,
okay, so
while you're navigating that, there is an assumption baked in that folks who are present on this call have in fact been using this framework, and in particular have done anything around this dimension and have gathered evidence in your project about it.
Yes, absolutely, there is.
For how many people is that true? Okay, a couple of people. Great, great.
Well, I mean, I would say we've used the framework, but haven't necessarily explicitly gathered data on that indicator.
But if you were to do a thought exercise, Jeff, which I know you love,
Mm-hmm.
how would we've got several projects in our portfolio. How would we do that?
I'm thinking on that. I'm not ignoring your question.
I think while he thinks, I'm curious for the people that haven't done questions on this dimension, is there a reason why? Like, has this not been important to the partnerships that you've been evaluating, or is it just too difficult, or is it et cetera, et cetera?
I can, this is Madeline from Santa Cruz. I have 2 RPPs and I use the 5 dimensions basically as my framework for all the interviews I do. I do interviews of the leadership teams on both projects. And I go to a lot of meetings and I have I just have a little grid and I fill out in it every time they talk about some research, I'm filling it out. So I just remind myself what the dimensions are and what the descriptions are. And I'm doing, it's qualitative, but, and all the questions I ask, I'm pretty much in each dimension, always asking equity related questions. So I'm glad you're focusing on that because it's really important. So in the research question, what kind of research has been done? What kind of progress have you, how did you use it? How did it advance equity? What does equity mean to you? And who was involved in the research? Who'd you collect the data from, and who did you get, who did you disseminate it to? So I like constantly asking those kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Okay.
I think, I mean, in my experience, this is one of the trickier indicators, at least in dealing with NSF grants. I find it to be one of the trickier indicators because it's hard to put in a good proposal without a set of research questions that go along with it. And I think, I'm sure there are some situations where the teams come up with the research questions in conjunction with the practitioners they're going to work with, but I don't think that's always the case. And so when the project starts and you've got your research questions, it's great to revisit it. And I know one thing that we do in our project with Springfield Mass Public Schools is, we always ask questions to the teachers about, we use this terminology, problems of practice, which people don't tend to respond to who aren't, evaluators and researchers, but we ask anyway. And, we try to get them to think about, in terms of teaching computer science, what are the problems that you have? What are the issues that you specifically want to address? And how do those line up with what we have as research questions? And it's hard. I have found it hard to get them into that frame of thinking about, what are the issues that I'm running into? What are the problems I want to address? And also, they require a certain amount of experience in doing it in order to know what the problems are that they're having specific to teaching computer science, which many of them are new to it. So there's kind of some chicken or egg problems I've found in dealing with this. But like I said, one of the things we try to do is make sure that when we talk to people on the practitioner side, we ask about, what are the issues that are relevant to you? What could come out of this that would be useful to you in your day-to-day work? And, sometimes we get interesting answers to those questions.
I think one of the, maybe I'll put Erin on the spot a little bit, because Jeff, what you were saying made me think of a comment that Erin had shared of, like, if the claim here is around, let's say it's 2A3, developing researcher inquiry questions with all relevant stakeholders present or where their perspectives are authentically represented. And Jeff, I mean, you just named it, that often, like, the development of research questions, at least the first place it hits a paper is as part of the grant writing process. And so one of the things Erin shared was, so if that's the thing, like, where do you gather evidence from it? Like, where does that happen? Happens during the grant writing process. And so then asking interviews or having, like, Erin's recommendation to us was have a survey item or ask an interview question of tell me about the grant writing process, who was involved, who led, who, contributed ideas, so that there can be a really specific situation where we think this thing would happen or is likely to happen. And I thought that was a really useful strategy, because for exactly what you're talking about. And then maybe in an interview question, a follow-up of like, have you revisited that? Like, once because you put in your grant and then 9 months later or a year later, you actually hear back, asking about when and how there's a return. So I think thinking about like, what are those particular situations or activities where you would be the best place to gather evidence is helpful to think about.
Yeah.
I also try to ask interview questions around decision making. We talk about this. One of the most important pieces is that the research is useful, and so trying to understand, towards what end. And I think action is one thing, but then it's also, I feel like, just an understanding of an issue. I mean, maybe. And so I try to really. I'm really trying to understand what do they mean by action? Are there specific things that they're trying to impact, that they want that? And so for the study that I was a part of for a really long time, MIST, this is a pretty easy question to answer, because we would give feedback to districts at the end of the year on what happened during that year, and they would use that information to plan strategies and to plan what was going to happen the next year. And so the action is, well, there's summer planning that's happening around math instruction. And so in order for this to be useful, we need to give them that information and time to actually use it to make decisions about summer planning. And so that's like an easy connection, but there's other things that are much harder to try to connect. Like, what is this? What are you trying to, why is this important for the district, for the school? Why is this research needed, and to what end? And so I don't know if that's helpful, but sometimes I think action might be too far away. I mean, it might just be, what do you need to understand? What do you need to get? What information do you need to help you understand something? And then what action will come out of that? It might not be clearly defined, honestly.
Well, and you'll see here, one of the things that we've been trying to do in terms of revising the framework is not put boundaries, but I mean, the process really depends on having some being as clear around the different constructs and then subconstructs as you can be. And so you see Dimension 2 really focuses on developing a research agenda and engaging in research and inquiry activities. The action part, or setting goals together, taking into account timelines and when decisions happen and the constraints of your partners, all of that, we've really placed over in outcome 3. So there is, this slide has a Dimension 3 partner to it, but it has been in a way to try and just clarify what we think, and recognizing that there are absolutely ties across them, but to try and do some of that work. I would love, please, if anyone is interested in providing feedback on where this refinement work that we're doing related to the dimensions themselves, I am happy to share that with you and get your feedback or chat about on the phone. Again, our goal is to refine this work and develop measures that then you all could use, that you are our sort of our customers for all of this, are the end users in mind. So we take very seriously that these things that we're working on reflect what's happening in the field and reflect something that would be most useful for you. So you're interested in providing feedback on any of this, we would love for that. That's a plug for you all. And then we do have the call to action, as Stacy suggested. We talk about it, which is, are any of your RPPs interested in participating in the upcoming field test? So we'll be doing over the summer, which is, it is the summer, but in July is when we'll launch a field test of RPPs. We're hoping to have 64 RPPs involved that range across the typology. So research alliances, NICs, design partnerships, and then partnerships that are community-based or maybe more participatory, in order to have that real range of the different ways people engage in their work. And we are asking for each partnership, if they're interested in participating, to have 2 researchers and 2 practitioners who are centrally involved participate in the survey and then in an interview with us. And then we will be following up later with other members of that education organization, those who are more peripheral, maybe not in the core center of the work, but more peripheral, for a short 5-minute survey to get a sense of who else knows about the partnership beyond that core team. In terms of what's in it for you or your RPPs, one is to help us with the development of these tools. I mean, we're going to be able to get a sense of which items work, which ones don't, where you need to have an interview, where you need to have a survey. Again, with the hope of having a tool that we can share back with you all, something that's been, we've kicked the tires on a little bit. For participating folks who are practitioners, especially given COVID and all of the things that are happening in the world today, we understand that their time is really critical and important. So we have a $50 thank you for them, where they can select from one of the Black-owned businesses. There's 3, and they can choose one of the gift cards from one of those. And then for RPPs that are participating, or potentially if there's enough interest from the CS for All network of RPPs, we could come back after we do our initial run of the data and share with you all, based on what we've seen, where the CS for All community falls along some of these dimensions based on our initial analysis, so that it can be useful for you all to be thinking about the work in your community as well. Paula, anything else I'm missing? The one thing I also just want to completely name, there's a lot of measuring of RPPs already happening with, like, you all are doing that work with your RPPs. I know SageFox is involved, is thinking about the community and doing some survey work there in the past few weeks. So we are completely aware of and want to be very respectful of everyone's time and not to be burdensome. So one, of course, everything is voluntary. But 2, if your partnership is involved, and there would be a way to try and connect with the evaluation work that you're doing, so that we could streamline and be a part of the evidence that you're gathering for an annual report or for your evaluation, I would love to think with you about what that could look like, so that this becomes data that, or information that you could gather to support the RPP that you're working with, your personal one. I don't know exactly, I think that might look different just depending on what your RPP is, but we're really open to having this not being something else on top of, but if it can be streamlined into the work that's ongoing, we'd love to have those conversations about how we can do that.
Caitlin, Madeline has a question that I think probably everybody has.
Oh.
How long is the survey and how much time will it take to fill out?
20 to 25 minutes is our goal right now. We're in the midst of cognitive piloting the items. So we actually don't have a final up in Qualtrics version yet to do a time test, but that's our commitment is 20 to 25 minutes. And then the interview would be an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. And even, I mean, we can, again, I think we're, again, recognizing what a time we're in right now, if it would make sense to do a focus group with members of your RPP, or 2 focus group, like we can think with you about what that could look like. if this would seem to be too burdensome, but there still is interest.
I apologize if you've already said this, Caitlin, but what's your timeline for when you would want to be scheduling some of these interviews and or focus groups and or creative?
So we're having absolutely, we will have a survey ready to go for the annual forum, the NERP annual forum, because we're going to be having some opportunities for RPPs there to participate as, if again, same circumstances, but if they want to there. So that'll be, Paula, those are the July 20th would be when we would have that available to get going. And then we, again, can work with RPPs through the summer into the fall based on what timelines are looking like or when there's availability. So the two requests or offers on the table, one is if you're interested in sharing, if you want to see what the development of the dimensions are looking like and the refinement. Stacy and I had a really awesome conversation where they made us think very differently about some of the assumptions we had baked in here. I would really welcome and love to have those conversations with you all. So that's number one. Please let me know if that's of interest to you. And then number two, if you think your RPP might be interested, Stacy and I can coordinate how you might be able to get in touch with us. And so we can either have that follow-up conversation about what that looks like for your RPP, or if you're ready to go, if you're just working with folks who absolutely are interested, we can get you set up and lined up for that to happen in the next couple weeks. Can I answer any questions or clarifications? Paula, Kristen, anything I'm forgetting, need to add?
I don't know if, Alan, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think that if it's possible to add a fifth person, and that would be the evaluator. And it may really also be interesting to see how the evaluator compares in their response based on their observations and other knowledge of the project to the responses that you get from the researchers and practitioners. And in part because it could help guide the role of evaluator for the formative work, to sort of understand how their observations can be used to move the project forward, which is a large part of the work that we're asked to do.
Yeah. And Alan, I really like thinking about this complementary like that you are positioned to know so intimately the partnerships that you're working with and the local contexts and challenges. This set of tools that we're developing is meant to be potentially useful in your work, but also to be able to something that would be applicable that isn't as context specific. So to be thinking about where something like this can help us see, like, what are the affordances and constraints of a tool like this that's built to reflect lots of different kinds of RPPs, and then the affordances and constraints of when you have, someone who's doing a developmental evaluation or providing ongoing feedback, and where there's some synchronicity in the work too. I mean, the goal would be that this is a complement to the work, or part of like a suite of measures or a suite of tools that you all would have available, recognizing that being able to get into the observations and build those relationships is probably not, we're not doing an observation tool, for instance, or field note guidance with this work. So thinking about where this can complement the kind of data that you're gathering already, I think would be great.
Yeah, I think I'm coming from the experience of seeing how projects have responded to the health assessment instrument and how much it prompted an understanding of the dimensions of RPP that they could even start considering. And so, one of the challenges is to, without having considered those dimensions, even getting responses that are coming from the same framework and how people are responding has been a big challenge between practitioners and researchers. But I think that we need also to understand that the evaluator needs to understand how they need to adjust their view of the project based on what the project folks see and define as their processes. Because we know there's no absolute set of things to measure against, which, you know, it's really, it's adapted by the project in terms of what they value and what they're trying to accomplish. And that's very challenging for an evaluator to make sure they have a robust enough process of their own to be able to measure what's important to the project as well as being measuring something against a framework.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think thinking about the evaluator as a member of the team, not with a different role, but it's something we haven't actually considered. So that's helpful to, and also just helpful for us to be thinking about if part of this is to gather things that are valid, right? I mean, you're talking about two different data sources. One, which would be survey items or interview items that were developed for broad, and then things that were really local and contextualized. I mean, that's a validity question related to what are we able to see from different vantage points, and to your point, from an evaluation perspective. That's super helpful.
I could also imagine, Caitlin, like when you're developing the survey, once it's out and about to be used, that someone could say, like, you know, my partnership is not really into this whole building capacity piece, like that hasn't come up, so I'm not going to administer like that section of the survey or those items. Mm-hmm. So that there's almost like a way to pick and choose what I mean, obviously things that hang together that actually make up, you know, a valid construct, but that you could be able to say, I'm really interested in one of the things that we just talked about. These are the measures that relate to that. That's what I'm going to use as an evaluator in this project.
Yep. No, absolutely. And that's our intention, is to have this as a suite of tools that you could use pieces of or together. I mean, we'll have some guidance about, you feel most confident if you use the full item bank, because that's how we've kind of kicked the tires on it. But if, to pick and choose different dimensions that you want to be working on, or to do the interview set here, but the survey items here. Absolutely. Really, we're doing this to create tools that are useful for the field. So whatever that looks like, that's what we want to do.
Great.
Yeah, and Stacey, I know we went a couple minutes over.
We're good.
I'll put my email address in the chat, so you can check in with me that way, and then also through Stacey if anything comes up to those two requests. And I hope that this community, we would love for you to be involved. You all are so thoughtful about this work already, and it would be, I mean, just in the 20 minutes have learned some things. So I would love to keep the conversation going, whatever way that looks like.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for being with us today. I found it really fun when we did our cognitive interview. I enjoy picking stuff apart like that. So, so if anyone else also enjoys picking stuff apart, would recommend. Great. So I know that Monica is here with us. I think still. Yes, great. I see you. So now I think we can jump right into the next portion. I'm going to share my screen if I can find it. Okay. I have so many windows open. Great. So this was our agenda. As you can see, we have flipped it and reversed it just a little bit. And now we are here. We didn't have an intro slide from Monica, but if Monica would like to introduce herself for those who don't already know her, that would be great.
Hello, everyone. My name's Monica McGill. I'm a computer science professor at Knox College, and I've also been working on the last few years on an NSF-funded project called csedresearch.org, I'm actually going to be on leave of absence next year from Knox. I'm actually incorporating, not incorporating, I guess I am incorporating still, CSEdresearch.org as a nonprofit. So all that's in the works, and we're going to see if we can make a go of it and help the community do that full time rather than having my time divided all the time. So if you haven't been out to CSEdresearch.org, we have a number of resources out there, articles that we've curated from K-12 computer science education, and actually curated the data from, so you can do a granular search on that. And also we're focusing on, and more, on evaluation instruments and protocols. So we have 110 that are specifically related to computer science education. The majority of those are focused on K-12. And we're looking at how we can enhance the site to make it more valuable to people. And there are a number of fronts that we're looking at right now, and this is one of them. This came from a discussion, gosh, last month. When was it? 3 months ago? I know it was in the last 4 weeks or so. So when we had a meeting, a webinar that was sponsored by the RPP for CS folks, and during the breakout session, this started to come up as well in one of the breakout rooms. So what we're looking at is potentially doing some type of feedback system. So what really came up was, is there a way to share resources, survey instruments that aren't really necessarily ready for the public? Maybe they're just in the process of being developed, and could we share those within the community using CSEdresearch.org as a platform, because we already have part of the infrastructure already built. And then do something that would actually go beyond that to provide a way to give feedback on the instruments themselves, maybe at a question level. So basically what we're talking about is external face validity on these instruments before they go live. So it would allow the RPP community to load instruments and protocols, and then the instruments can be shared to the public, or just within the RPP community to be determined, just options there. And then the vetting process as well. Okay, Stacy. Like I mentioned, it would allow then a place to capture the information for external face validity. And the system then would provide a way to track all this. So when it was received, what versions of the instrument that you're on, and then you could also report, of course, external face validity in your papers. And it could be very granular, like here are all the changes that were requested, or if it's just a paper that's not on the instrument itself, but just usage, you could just do some overall changes that were made, overall revisions that were made, depending on the granularity that you wanted to report. Okay, next slide. So this was just a simple mock-up. This is not in the system. I just threw it together as a prototype. And each question might have a rating system or possibly a rubric depending on what type of question it is. And I was even thinking, like, if it's a Likert scale, maybe taking some best practices for Likert scales and putting those in, and then they could be marked that way. And then there would be an empty feedback box, text box, where individuals could write their own comments in about the question. So it's not really a difficult system to build. Like I said, we have a lot of the infrastructure already in place. It would take a little bit of time, but it's not terrible. I would like to know, like, what types of things, if people think this would be interesting to do, if you would use it, we can build it, but if you don't use it, then that's kind of a moot point. What types of things you would like to measure for each of these different instruments or scales or items, depending on how far down in granularity you want to go. And how would we encourage people to engage in that process and engage in giving feedback to other people's instruments? And so I have here, like, could it be an exchange system? So you have to vet other people's first before you can have yours vetted, type of thing. So you're banking points as you investigate other people's instruments. All right, next slide. So mainly, that's just a very, very rough prototype, but I'm just curious, like, what your thoughts are. Would you use this type of system either as wanting to have your instruments vetted or vetting other people's instruments? Would it be beneficial for your projects? And if it would be, what features would you like to see?
Can I ask you a question, Monica?
Yeah.
Are you thinking of this for the evaluators or the researchers part of the RPP? Because when I look at the site, most of this is really for the researchers.
Yeah, it could be either. In this case, it could be either. I think it came from the evaluation perspective, but I sure would like to see some of the instruments that are used in research be improved.
So you're going to want to include kind of qualitative measures?
Yeah, that would be like, yeah, the protocols. So that would be part of it as well. Like what protocols are being used, if it's a qualitative study, if it's a semi-structured interview, what are the questions? And then people could give feedback on those questions as well.
I think it's a great idea.
I guess one thought I have is it's the instruments, but also like the relationship or having a critical friend to bounce things off of. And I don't know in the marketing of it what might be more attractive, or at least initially to have.
And that's a good point, Christine. Yeah, so the idea for this really did come out of, I think, our very first ever evaluators gathering, where people were like, I'm making all of my own protocols and instruments and survey items and stuff, homegrown, and I don't really know what everyone else is doing. This would be a platform, by which people could actually show each other what we're doing, and then from there possibly discover, either similarities, or we can refine our items, or just a way to sort of beef up what we're already doing, making it a little bit more robust, and also creating, hopefully, my grand vision for this would be creating a little community whereby we have a culture of friendly engagement with each other's work, even before it's ready for prime time, and helping it get there.
It may be just formulating something from what you said, Christine. So instead of it being just a general, like somebody posted something out there, you get a notification, but maybe it's like you ask 3 or 4 people to vet your instrument, and then you send them the link, and then they can use the link to log in and give information. So you're kind of picking and choosing who is the community you might like to have vet it.
Yeah, I guess my idea isn't even that fully formed, but I could imagine there are some times where you really want someone to focus very specifically maybe on the language. And there are other times where, my ideas are all over the place and I'm still just trying to get something down on paper. And maybe this is really a venue for one or the other, but I could imagine this kind of process could be used in a few different ways.
One of the things in a project I've been a part of that was developing practical measures, it's when we posted them on a website where folks had to, like you said, put in their email address, and then they would have access to the measures. But we also had a document that went along with the measures that was almost a table, and it was really like, this is the item, this is what we were intending when we wrote, like really trying to give additional information about the items. And then we had a white paper that went along with it, just how they were developed and how we think that they should be used and our ideas about it. But I could imagine something a little not as time intensive as that, but just where it's a like an annotated version almost of this is how I've used it thus far and why and the purpose and certain things like that that maybe we could agree upon. Like these are some important key aspects to share when we do share the measures.
Monica, I have a question for you. Did you envision this being like a closed group, like only like people in this kind of talking group, or is this like anybody could find the website and then they could vet the measures?
I think it would be closed.
Okay, so that's what I was thinking. That's what I thought you were going to say. So what I'm hearing too is another way to think about that is that have the website be a supporting piece to the puzzle. And so to Christine's point, what we've found in NERP that's been useful is if you have stuff that's going on like on a website, then that just helps you like get a little bit of data or like get a little bit of a feeling of like what people are worried about or what they're talking about. But the most kind of meaningful thing is a thought exchange. So like if you accompany it with like a learning webinar where like people can come together and specifically ask each other like, okay, or like today we're going to talk about these 3 instruments because those are the ones that keep getting downloaded or whatever. I don't know, right? Like you're just using the website as a supporting element. But the main piece is actually the discussion part where people can come in and they can workshop the stuff live. And I think you might get a lot farther that way. So just a suggestion, take it or leave it. But that's sort of what I heard Christine. I thought that might be useful for you.
That's a great idea. Thank you. At that point, well, yeah, we'll have to see if we can figure out a way to support it, especially if we do a webinar. I think that you can accomplish a lot. Even, if you do 3 in an hour, right? 20 minutes each, you can go through quite a bit.
Hi, Monica, it's Jason.
Hi.
Another possibility might be offering different people opportunities to put together different types of webinars, because I could imagine a webinar for how to upload items and webinar for how to download, how to use, how to apply. So it could be something where, but I agree that that conversation, I always say the conversation is an important part. The other thing I wanted to suggest is, I don't know if you've seen Project Quantum and its collection of assessment items, but that's kind of like on steroids, a version of something that you could potentially do with survey items. They actually let you, I think, collect and share data too, but it might be something to look at as a possible for some ideas.
I think also building on what Aaron said, having some kind of rubric that says like, who is your intended population that you're going to collect data from, or have you already done it, or is this in development, and just sort of that kind of gives more information about what the use is. And what stage the project's in, because I think we, especially with the semi-structured interviews, you ask different questions at different stages. If you're, and so I think that would be helpful.
Right, and to add to that, I mean, as more stuff gets collected, it might be useful to break it down even by type of RPP, right? Is this being used in a NIC? Is this being used in a design-based implementation research project? It might become more specialized over time.
Great. This is great feedback. Very helpful. Any other thoughts? So if I came up with not a prototype, a working prototype, but just a paper prototype, would you be all willing to give a little bit more feedback?
You got a few nods.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we had scheduled this to go until 3:30. So we have plenty of time if folks would like to continue to either talk about a platform such as this and what maybe are some essential features that you would be looking for, or something that would cause you not to participate on the other hand. Or, you know, Caitlin and Paula also still on the call, and we can go back to talking about what they're working on. Or we can do none of those things. We have, what I'm trying to say is we have options for how we would like to use the rest of our time or seed that time. And I am looking for some input from attendees on this call as to which you prefer.
I have a question for Caitlin and Aaron. And so do you all have, and you may have it, and I just don't know, do you have a toolkit of some sort for people who may be writing a grant for an RPP project on things to consider? So the front end, not just the assessment on the back end, but here's some key things that you should have in your proposal and why.
Yes. So one of the products, or one of the, we talked a lot about like the interview protocol or the survey items. Those actually will sit within a design pattern, which is related back to this evidence-centered design approach, which, you know, going back to really starting of like, what are the constructs, and then thinking about what are the situations you would go to, what would people say or do, which people, right? Not everyone is going to be the person you or people you would want to go to for particular questions. And then thinking about where the items come from. So, or where it would make sense to do a survey versus an interview or an observation or artifact analysis. So they are the particular tools, and we're here talking about them because we need to test them out. But it will sit as part of this larger design pattern, which would outline the revised 5 dimensions and then provide guidance to think about for dimension 2 related to these particular, here are the claims, the revised claims and subclaims. Who are going to be your best respondents? What are the situations you might go to, or meetings you might attend, or documents you might look to, or survey items 1 through 5, or interview protocol items 2 through 6, and then have those available up online, so that that thinking of leading with the constructs and leading with the things you're trying to gather evidence comes first, and then these are the ways to gather the evidence based on our recommendations around how to do an evaluation based on your constraints, based on the funding you have available, based on the size of what you're trying to do over time or just at a point in time, those kinds of things. So that's actually the end goal for us, is to have that guidance available in the field. And then some of these things are tools that can be used from that will stem from that. But to help with thinking about, you know, to Aaron raised the issue before of like, we want to see if this RPP is helping, in fact, support the district leaders make changes to their summertime professional development. So that, you know, you would turn to outcome 3 in this design pattern, and we would have some guidance for you about trying to identify where would be those places you would look, what would be those documents you would look, who you might turn to or need to talk to or survey or engage with, who are going to be your best informants or your best sources of information for that. And then some possible tools that you could use for it. And I think, I mean, the other thing that has been, I'm hoping we can also bring into the the conversation of that particular document, and I think we tapped a little bit on it here, is use for what, right? So that our team thinks about this all the time. We're developing these tools and thinking about who and how would use them. I feel very comfortable if you all were to use these tools to be supporting the RPPs in their ongoing work. And we would, have some ideas about how we might recommend you could use them for that purpose. If it's a funder who's interested in evaluating their portfolio and determining which partnerships to add additional fund, to support for an additional round of funding, that's a very different kind of use. And our team is trying to think about preemptively what kind of guidance we could put in there for these different sort of use situations, recognizing that once they're out there in the world, you also can't prevent people from using them. But I think it's very much in a similar vein to what Erin was saying about when they were working on practical measures, providing some guidance around why they were designed the way they do, recommendations on how to use them, and as part of a larger design that you're trying to work on. Does that help, Monica? I feel like it's sort of an answer, but.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So maybe, I can kind of ask that question back to you. If you're thinking about developing an online space or an online space plus a community where items are being developed and refined and reflected on, would there be a place to have guidance related to who would use them, under what conditions, for developmental purposes or practical purposes, or for funding? Would that be part of the thinking, or even some more of the nuts and bolts of okay, who would best answer this question? Who would you want to put this survey item in front of?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, I've been thinking about the lines of, tips on how to improve things like, Likert scales or, multiple choice items or whatever it is. So more specifically, rather than broadly, at least within the system itself, here's a link out to this information, or here's what's being suggested for this. And that would probably be, I think it would be good for the evaluation folks, but even more so for the research folks, because the quality of the instrumentation that's out there is just not very good on a broad scale. There are some that are very good and they, kind of filter to the top, but yeah, so that's a good question. Something to think about. I think for surveys on proposals and things, normally you don't have to include the instrument. You just have to really include the research questions and how you're going to collect the information. Although you could say specifically, I'm going to use, these 3 instruments as part of or I'm going to target these 3 instruments to measure self-efficacy and interest, for example. So that could be another thing to look at. Now we avoided doing rating systems in the system, and it was a big discussion in the virtual focus group that we had 3 years ago when we first started building this out, designing it, because we felt it would be too controversial, right? Or it wouldn't be rated for the right things. It would be rated because this person's popular, and yeah, that's the most popular instrument and they have the loudest voice and they're, drumming it up, as opposed to getting the 5 stars for quality. And instruments are a little bit different. The articles, we didn't really we assumed that the articles are already vetted through a double-blind peer review process for all the journals and conferences that we target. So that didn't make sense. Like we weren't going to, if they said it was good enough for the journal, I wasn't going to go in and say, there's some serious problems here with this article. So that wasn't, we didn't feel like that was our role to play. But instruments, I think there's more leeway there. I just don't know how to do it and make sure it stays correct, right? Has the integrity, like people are really leaving the right comments that they should be leaving on. People who know how to actually build instruments are leaving the comments, not people who are just picking it up to use it.
Well, and if you wanted to be sort of a developmental, like so we could put things out there that we're just developing ourselves and want comments on, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want it rated when I'm in that spot. I mean, once it's out, yeah. So, and unless you're just relating it on objective measures, like what's the reliability and how do they visibility and those kind of things, that would make sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that we kind of do. But even then people will say, well, the four of us who created the instrument vetted it, so it passed internal face validity, right? Like, well, okay.
Monica has lots of thoughts and feelings about this.
Yeah. Especially I read up more, especially as I see like K through 8, right? More instruments going into, you know, second, third grade with Likert scales. And I looked it up a couple weeks ago because I was really curious, like, how can you use these Likert scales? And just learning that kids either really love things or really, really hate things. So you're going to get these extremes on these scales. And there are other things that I was learning too. It's like, this is very informative. I wonder if people know, the research community. And there was an instrument that was presented at a conference last week that I was like, yeah, I don't think third graders, it's not gonna. It was 50 minutes long for a third grader. So
Well,
I didn't, yeah.
Monica, I wonder if there's some way, and I don't know how this would go, but kind of a list of, 5 questions about a certain topic, like people want to know. So it's less about, in this survey tool, this worked well, this didn't, or this isn't necessarily following the research, but what do we know about Likert scales for kids? So it's more of providing ideas for folks who might be at different ranges.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's where I'm moving towards next with this. And I was wondering if I could do a paper, or like a SIGC special session or something, on just evaluation instruments, because I think we're ready for it in the community. So if somebody out there is interested, let me know.
I don't know. I feel like we have a call full of people who have officially hit their afternoon slump. Counted like 7 yawns so far. But thank you, Monica, for presenting this initial outline. I know that it was kind of an amorphous ask that I made of you like a month ago. It's like, what would it take to do this thing? But it seems like we have some resounding yes from the people who were on this call about this being a potentially valuable creation of yours. So I'm glad to hear it. Well, that's all that we had for regularly scheduled programming for this call. We have 17 minutes left. I will just share my screen real quick. I do have some just upcoming dates that I wanted to make sure folks had on their calendars. Let me get to that right slide. Share my screen yet again. And then, there we go. Some of these dates, if you all are subscribed to the RPP for CS newsletter, you would have already seen. But the Deadline for extended abstracts for this special issue on justice-centered computing education. The deadline got extended to July 10th. So if you've been feeling overwhelmed, but also wanted to submit something for that special issue, you've got more time. AERA deadline is coming up rather quickly in just under a month. So if you're planning on submitting something to that conference, now would be a good time to start. July 28th, we, are in the newsletter, RPP for CS put out a statement about racial justice in particular and ways that we think RPPs could support racial justice in your locale and in your partnerships. And we said that on the 28th, we're going to be opening up our Zoom line for a couple of hours to have conversations. Either the first part of the conversation, we were sort of hoping that it would be a broad-ranging conversation about how racism shows up in education systems, how those systems might be tied to other large systems and structures that are part of our society. And then for the second part of it, have a more focused conversation about what actually can we do in our partnerships with our practice partner organizations, with our research partner organizations, knowing that higher ed and nonprofits and all sorts of other places are not immune from any of that and often have a lot of their own work to do. But just like thinking that it could be a time where we can use our community, which is probably the most valuable asset that RPP for CS has tried to curate over the past few years, to really get some concrete action ideas flowing. And then of course, SIGSI due in August after that. So these are just things that I wanted to keep on everyone's calendars. And even those folks, Caitlin, Paula, you're welcome to be on that call as well. I want to make sure that you know that. With that, does anyone have any final thoughts or questions, anything like that? Otherwise, we might give you some time back. Hearing none, just wanted to thank all of our speakers one more time. Thank you, Caitlin and Paula and Monica, for being on a call with us today. You're doing great work, and I'm very excited to be part of all the work that y'all are doing, and I'm looking forward to where it goes.
Thanks, Stacy. Bye, Christine. Bye, Madeline. Now I can stop recording.